Hello, everyone. This is Chris Shepard, Artistic Director of The Complete Bach, back again with another episode of ChatJSB. And I have with me today Ian Watson, who is, he will not admit to this, but I will say he is a good friend of mine and a really treasured colleague. He and I have done a whole bunch of work together, not just Bach. Ian, you may remember that you were my accompanist for a high school regional choir festival in
How
Massachusetts.
could I forget? Yeah.
Like all of us, Ian does a little bit of everything. He before we pressed record, he said that he might look tired today. He has a week with the BSO up in Tanglewood. So Ian is one of the hardest working musicians I know. But for the purposes of today's chat, Ian, you are really just a Bach specialist and not just a Bach specialist. Ian is one of the greatest organ and harpsichord continuo players I know. And if you really want to thrill, you've got to hear this guy play Brandenburg 5. I heard him play with Handel and Haydn Society, of whom he is associate conductor. And in fact, speaking of H&H and the Complete Bach, Ian, you will be playing some double harpsichord concerti. And I should say you are so gifted, maybe you will be playing both harpsichord parts at the same time. No.
Not on this occasion, but I mean, who knows? I might be doing a chick career on it at some point.
There you go. So we're so thrilled. I really wanted to make sure that we kicked off everything at the beginning of the project with you because you're so important to us.
Oh, thank you. That's nice.
So I'm just going to wind you up and let's hear this mellifluous English accent of yours. So can you talk a little bit about how everything with Bach started for you? I assume as an organist, but you were working in London in the moment when the period instrument revolution was just in absolute full force. So we can hear just a little bit about what was that like to be working with these amazing people in the in the 80s in particular.
Yeah, well, it's great to chat with you, Chris. Absolutely, and about Bach. Obviously, all our favorite composer. So I think there's obviously a lot of experimentation going on when I first started professionally, as it were. And I remember the English Baroque Soloists was obviously a very famous group now. When they first started as the Monteverdi Orchestra, it was a very gradual process of experimenting with the various instruments. They didn't just sort of switch straight over into using period instruments, for example. It was a very gradual sort of metamorphosis. First of all, using period bows with, as it were, regular violins with steel strings, etc., and then changing them to gut strings, and then that sort of way of. So there's a lot of that going on. It wasn't just the period instrument movement didn't suddenly start overnight. It was a gradual process.
Sorry, you should say for everybody that this is the group that John Eliot Gardner founded.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Excuse me. Of course. Well, I say of course, but yes, indeed. And then I think that there were other people who were much more influenced by the kind of Harnoncourt thing, which was really I think he changed much more quickly into using period instruments, not in order to make the music speak, obviously, in a different way. I think that Harnoncourt himself had been a cellist, I think, in the Vienna Philharmonic.
Exactly right.
And sort of, slapping his forehead every day. And eventually decided that he needed to make a change for himself, his own sanity, I suppose. And so that was a huge sea change, which he personally, I feel more than anybody, was responsible for. And I remember feeling highly irritated, actually, by some of his recordings.
Yes.
Because the way that Harnoncourt spoke about music in those days was absolutely wonderful. And of course, he is a wonderful musician. There's no question about it. But he had some ideas, and he really put them into practice without any sort of fear or favor, and created some friction, which is, of course, is the only way that one can progress in anything. So that was kind of going on as well. And there was a whole kind of hinterground of people trying to make things happen. Funnily enough, rather similarly to the way that musicians in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century were trying to make things happen. You know, there are people that say that you shouldn't play the violin, for example. You shouldn't play any higher than fourth position or something, you know, before 1732. I think July, in fact, 1732. Of course, it's ridiculous because there were people all over Europe trying to make things happen, trying to do different things. So I feel that that zeitgeist in the early 70s, which is basically when I started doing it professionally, you know, it had that sort of feeling of experimentation and trying to make something happen. So that's a very exciting thing to be involved in. And of course, not every group felt that way. I mean, I was actually the principal keyboard player or harpsichord player with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields for quite a few years. And also
and that was the era when those were terrific recordings, and of course they go in the period direction, but they were much more palatable recordings to the general public, weren't they?
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. And also the English Chamber Orchestra. I was a principal with them for 10 years at least, and you know those two orchestras were synonymous with Bach. And for example, Benjamin Britten, he did a terrific amount of Bach with the English Chamber Orchestra. A couple of recordings. I remember hearing one of Brandenburg 6, where it's done like a concerto grosso. You have a big sort of viola section and then two soloists. It's a great idea in a way, but not what Bach wrote, of course. But you know that was going on, and they used plenty of vibrato, and that was their style. So I found that as a harpsichordist, I had to adjust the sort of style that I used. For example, when I first started playing with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, George Malcolm had been the keyboard player, and George, he's a marvelous guy, but of a different era. You know, he's a great musician, and he wrote out like a concerto. I remember playing like a Geminiani concerto, Geminiani concerto grosso, and the harpsichord part was like a concerto. And I was a kid, and I got these parts. I had to learn this, so I practiced assiduously this concerto that he'd written and played it, and they seemed to love it because that's what they were used to.
Yes.
But if you went into Gardner or Trevor Pinnock or these sort of people and did that, you get the real stink eye, you know.
Yes.
So you had to really adjust, you know, really to a large degree, the style of playing if you wanted to work. That is,
sure. That's so interesting. And did you learn? So did you ever work with a teacher who taught you the new emerging periods? No,
I really didn't. It was I learned it on the job.
Yeah.
Because
can you summarize for everybody? As it turns out, I also had that experience,
right.
And I would coach with one very old school guy, and then the period guy would come in, Jaap Schroeder, actually.
Oh, wow.
And coach us, and he would just always be saying less. And Ron Roseman, who is this wonderful old school oboist, it was always more. I didn't have
100%. Yeah.
And so what were some of those other ways of comparing the styles for you?
Well, I think that in London there's obviously a terrific amount of stuff going on, you know, all the time. And if you can, I wanted to work, you know, I was a young guy, I was ambitious, I wanted to do a lot. And so I wanted to please people. I wanted to please the conductors and please the directors. So I tried to do what I felt they wanted. But also, you know, I have my own sort of feelings about what was right as well. So, but I found that the Academy, for example, they wanted a lot of notes. And I think also that it's interesting because I think the period instrument movement I think that had an effect on this very much, because the sort of instruments, harpsichords, that were being used by the Academy, for example, in the early 70s, were these kind of, they were modern instruments, not based on any sort of historical anything, kind of soft-bellied kind of tortoise thing, with a hard shell. And they had no sound. They had no sound.
Right.
So really, really the only way that one could make one's presence felt as a keyboard player was to fill in. Every time there was a rest, you filled it in with 16th notes. I mean, that was basically it.
Yes.
And so when the concept of kind of rhythm and harmony being the major function of harpsichord playing, which I believe it is, that was really not possible, because most of those modern players, they had no interest in what you were doing anyway.
Yeah.
You're kind of the guy stuck at the back, whereas the period instrument people, they wanted the harpsichord right in the middle, so that everyone could focus on that incisive, ictus every time. One of the most, I remember playing a Haydn symphony, playing forte piano continuo. It was one of the first things I ever did professionally, with the Handel, the Hanover Band, sitting in the middle of the orchestra and hearing that kind of scrubbing that one often gets with the violas and second violins, which in a modern orchestra, then, but it was so exciting. I was practically falling off a chair, because the instruments were different and the articulation was different, and they were actually listening to what I was doing, and it was an engagement in a much, much different way to the other modern orchestras that I played with at the time. So yeah, I think the fact that the historical instruments were being produced, which had a different sound and a different function, sort of went with the territory. Yeah.
Can I return you to?
Oh yes.
That's fantastic, and so I want to return you to Harnoncourt, because he said something, and now I want to reflect on what you just said and draw you out a bit, because I agree with you that Harnoncourt was the person more than anybody else who changed the landscape. And as you say, they changed to period instruments quite quickly. It wasn't really a long evolution for Harnoncourt and Consentus. Because so one of the things, although I also agree with you that I don't love the recordings of the cantatas, for example, necessarily, but the way he writes about music is so extraordinary. And one of the things that he said, and I want to hear if you had this moment as well, sitting in the middle of the seconds and violas, he said about the first time they read together the St. Matthew Passion on period instruments, he said, it was that road to Damascus feeling that all of a sudden they understood it. And by doing the articulations and by using the proper instruments, balance got fixed, tempos they all made sense. As you were going back and forth between this hybrid Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, modern instrument, but trying to play around a little bit with being something like authentic, versus Hanover Band or Gardner, did you have that road to Damascus conversion, or were you just making a living as London musicians do?
Yes, that. No, I think that it's difficult to really pinpoint that or focus in on that. Because the reason I hesitate is because in their own way, the Academy, for example, who I had a lot of experience with, they're excellent players. I mean, they were technically, I mean, that was the most recorded orchestra in history at one point, with good reason.
Yeah.
I mean, to hear the first violins of that orchestra weaving around like one player.
So that was inspiring in its own way then.
Yeah.
They really were. I mean, I cut my teeth on that recording, recording B minor mass, which you may have been playing on. And it's nothing like where we have ended up, but
no.
Lord, it was such a great performance.
Mm. So I think it's there was kind of a beauty in that, a very, very clean, a clean and precise and very understandable presentation of Baroque music, or Bach particularly. So that it was so good that when you went to someone like I did a playing with Hogwood in the early days, and I played with Pin a couple of times, or a number of times, mostly with Gardner, and also Hickox Richard Hickox, when he started the Collegium Musicum 90 in later years, a lot with them. But I didn't get the feeling it was so different, because when you had a lot of experience, I think that this is one reason why it's so good to, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, because I know that you've had a similar background. It's a great idea for young musicians to do as much of everything as you possibly can. I know you're a great jazz or cabaret type pianist, as well as being a Bach scholar, etc. And I used to play in West End shows as well.
I thought I knew everything about you, Ian.
I
didn't know that.
Yeah, I got sacked a couple of times. Me and My Girl, I think it was with Emma Thompson. I got sacked for overacting on. I had to go and play the piano on stage. But that's another story. That's for another Zoom meeting. But but doing a lot of everything, and then it becomes more apparent where one's heart lies. And there was a time when with the Academy, for example, we were given a schedule this thick, for the next 6 months, and we're going to Australia, and we're going to the Far East, and we're going to all over the place. And I was 20 something. I thought, this is the best job in the world. I'm never giving this up ever, sort of thing. But then time goes on, and you realize that maybe there are more other things to explore and to get involved with.
And actually, Ian, I'm going to use that, as, if you don't mind, as a pivot, because it's a great segue. Yeah. I happen to know, and today's not the day to talk about this, but you had a whole career conducting opera, and we can talk about that another time. And I do love that. And in my experience, even people like Harnoncourt, Roger Norrington, you get the impression that after a while they became the victims of their own success in period work, because these are phenomenal conductors who conduct the entire repertoire and
right,
feel pigeonholed commercially.
Yes.
So I totally agree that we should all do
actually
that.
That's a great point, Chris, because
those guys are
people like Norrington, who also played with quite a bit. So Norrington and Harnoncourt, they both came from this very sort of ordinary, as it were, musical with playing with big symphony orchestras or whatever. Actually, I think Norrington was a singer, and then focused in on this kind of almost hardcore. It has to be like this, you have to do it this way. And then when they become successful, suddenly, well, we can do Mozart with the Vienna Philharmonic, no problem at all. So it's kind of, it goes, I don't know, is that full circle? I don't know what it is, but it's certainly something.
Well, there's an article in it, if nothing else, because it is, and it just comes back to where we started the whole conversation, which is we're gigging musicians. I played cabaret in New Hampshire this week. You're at Tanglewood, like that's and I think that for them, they're gigging musicians and good to go. So there you are in Germany, and the one experience I want to be sure that we talk about. Because these are too short, these conversations with great people like you, is that you were working in Germany as a conductor the year that Elliot Gardner did his very famous Bach cantata pilgrimage in 2000. So I know that you were able to do many in the second half of the year. But I just want to hear what that experience was like. Maybe just even begin by telling everybody, because not everybody will know about that project, and just what that meant to you as a Bach lover.
Sure. Well, in the year 2000, John Eliot Gardner and the English Baroque soloists and the Monteverdi Choir embarked on what was described as a pilgrimage, a project to perform and record all of the Bach cantatas in 1 year, emulating Bach's work week, and also performing in many of the places in which these cantatas were performed, or which had associations with Bach himself. And I think that was a tough call to do in 1 year. So I think that some of these recordings were made prior to 2000, but there is a huge number.
I mean, it's
mind-boggling, actually. And what was really interesting was there's the idea of the work week. We started rehearsing on Wednesday, as it were, and then I think we may have rehearsed Wednesday, Thursday, and then we traveled and we performed on the Saturday. And one kind of got into a rhythm, which was very, very interesting. That was unexpected to me. There was a kind of a rhythm to the whole thing, and the music was part of that. And on the correct, excuse me, I missed one essential element. In places that Bach was associated with, either worked or also these cantatas on the correct liturgical day. Sorry, that was a bit convoluted, but the correct liturgical day. So yeah, that's where the rhythm thing came in. Very, very interesting. And people wonder what it would have sounded like, and we're trying to make, obviously these are very expert people, the players in that orchestra are very, very expert, and the singer's wonderful. And so often the music was known to us. Conversely, music was obviously not known to anybody, including Bach, until about Monday of the week which it was performed. So he wrote the music, and then they got the music, which probably had a number of mistakes in it, on Wednesday or Thursday. And I believe you probably know this better than I, but I believe some of them were performed on a Saturday morning, but the services were very, very long, of course. So when we think about what did this sound like, well, with this group, it sounded pretty good, as you can hear on the recordings. But imagine Leipzig on January the 13th, 1725, at 7 o'clock in the morning, in an unheated church, playing music that you had really very, very sketchy appreciation of. I think it must have sounded awful. I don't see how it could have done anything else, because those instruments are very, very susceptible.
Oh, they would have been
to temperature and humidity and all of that. And right, so
and of course he complained so much about the boys that he was given for his choirs. So if he was complaining that much, then they truly couldn't have been good.
I've got to tell you the story. Actually, Gardner himself told us this story, but apparently it was discovered in the early 19th century that a very old elderly gentleman who had actually sung with Bach in Leipzig, apparently, and he was, as it were, interviewed in the early 19th century
on Zoom.
On Zoom, yes. And of course, the question everyone wanted to ask was, what was it like to sing with J.S. Bach? Well, I suppose you want me to give you the answer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
On camera.
He said, we were awful, and he beat us every day.
Oh. Somehow it's not surprising.
I don't know how true that is, but it's a good story.
It's a good story. But you guys were not awful. I mean, that tour.
No, not at all.
With those musicians, it just must have been.
Yeah.
Do you have a few different places? But before I pressed record, you mentioned Arnstadt, which was very, very in Bach's years. What was it like to? And I'm sure you've played at Thomaskirche many times in Leipzig.
Do you know, I've never played at the Thomaskirche. No, I've never played
Oh,
there.
that's really
I've played all over.
surprising.
I've played many other places.
Yes. Oh, I know.
Eisenach and others, but not.
I will take you, Ian. When the complete Bach goes on tour, you will come as
Oh, great! Thanks.
keyboard player. Oh, that's
Okay,
really
okay,
interesting.
we got that on tape, by the way.
Unfortunately, we're recording this. So where were some of the places that you sort of felt the presence of the genius? Did it?
Well, Arnstadt was obviously one. In fact, I think Arnstadt, there's the Bach organ is on the kind of third level at the back of the church. It's not the original. I don't believe it's the original pipes, but it's all the draw stops and the keyboards. The keyboards are original, and it does play. It's an organ.
Yeah.
But that's I didn't get the opportunity to play that. I would love to have touched those keys.
Absolutely.
I mean, who wouldn't? So that was pretty amazing. We did a couple of concerts there. So we're gazing up at this spectacle. It's pretty extraordinary. I think there was another. I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's Dornberg. I think it's where he was married. I think where he was first married. Tiny little Dornbach. Excuse me. I think it's Dornbach. Forgive me if I'm wrong about that. It's Dorn something. And that is a tiny little church. And with the maypole, when we were there was a maypole outside, and just absolutely sort of perfect, exactly what you would expect a little German village to be like that. I played in Curtin, obviously not in the palace, as it were, but there's a large church there. Again, the name escapes me, but concerts were also given there by Bach. So that was pretty interesting. I think that's where I recorded Cantata 35, which there's a big organ. I think it's like 5 movements. It's a big organ sinfonia at the beginning and a kind of a curly-fingered aria, and then another sinfonia later. Yeah, so that sort of thing. But these were so exciting to do at the time, for sure.
It is. It's a project that the mind and to think that,
right. Yeah.
And really only 1 year in the history of that really quite amazing ensemble anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but of talking to you and other English friends, it strikes me that it is a project that is possible for an English organization because you guys are so famous for being incredibly fast readers and doing everything on as few rehearsals as possible for financial reasons as well as tradition, that it's hard for me to think of an American ensemble, for example, that would be able to duplicate. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of music to undertake in a year like that. And was that the zeitgeist of that group? You just sort of get on with it, and
I think to some extent, to probably quite a considerable extent. Also, of course, there's a close proximity of England to Europe. You just go through the Eurostar tunnel, or the flights are very quick. And we used a number of foreign players too. Marcel Ponsil, who was one of the most famous oboe players. He gave a number of concerts with us and others, but they were mostly English players. I think also, when I mentioned earlier about the sort of rhythm of the thing, I think this is also an important element, because even though one is, obviously we're all familiar with the style, and style is everything in music. It's what makes it. So when one's doing it week in and week out, you kind of get even more familiar with the language, as it were. Familiar sounds too superficial, actually, because there's a sort of it's a pathway, if it's possible, to make any sort of pathway into a mind the size of Bach's, but for us mortals, as it were. But you kind of find that way of a style of doing it, which of course brings us on to something else, because there are many, many ways of doing it. And as I sort of alluded to before, the period instrument way is the way that I prefer and I like to do it. But it doesn't mean that other ways of doing it are wrong, or absolutely not. And I think it's a testament, of course, and this is an old chestnut, of course, but it's a testament to the incredible quality of Bach's music, that one can play it, on almost any instrument in almost any way, and it's going to communicate what it does itself. So I think that's a kind of an interesting point. But from our sort of rather narrow, as it were, way of the rhythm of the week in and week out, and the becoming even more, I would say, inured rather than familiar with. You become buried in the everything, right in there, sort of looking around. So it was just a great experience, which
is, of course, the ethos of the complete Bach. I mean, that is the answer to the question, why would you be so audacious as to do something like this? And the answer is because it's kind of the only way to get into the mind of somebody with such an extraordinary mind, is to do enough that it can be.
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
I don't need to say, because you of all people would. But you can't list all that many composers for whom that would be true, that you would have to know everything before you know anything.
That's right.
There are some.
Yeah, well put.
Ian, I always do these questions at the end, so I'm just going to shoot them at you, and see what you have to say.
All right.
I am curious about who your greatest teachers and mentors were, and also related to that, what recordings really left their mark on you as you were growing up and listening to music? So your greatest teachers, mentors, and recordings that really helped you to think a lot about music.
Well, let's see. As far as teachers go, I didn't have teachers specifically for Bach or Baroque music, any of that. It was really done by osmosis, just listening to and being involved with really good people, and
how 18th century that is, though, isn't it?
Right.
Because
right.
I mean that was Bach's experience. You were just only ever an apprentice, really.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I'm going to remember that point, actually, and I'll say it later and pretend I thought of that. But
it's being recorded.
So, yeah, it's just a question of growing gradually, and I felt that I kind of grew as a musician, and then, as said earlier, and then kind of found what I liked doing, or what I felt I was better at, I suppose. It's interesting, as a slight diversion from that, but I'm going to say this, probably shouldn't, but when we do these Q&A things with the Handel and Haydn site and other places, they'll go around the various musicians and they'll say, well, what was your road to Damascus experience? Say, well, this happened or that. It was fine, great, good for you. What happened to me was that I basically taught myself to play the keyboard instrument. I didn't start having piano lessons until I was 13 years old. And so then people started patting me on the head and saying how good it was, and then people started paying me money for it. I thought, well, this is good, and that was my road to Damascus. I just sort of fell into it, carried on doing it, and then sort of started learning how to do it. And that was, the rest is history. So
I love that. And like, I'm not kidding. That really is a very pre-modern way of becoming, I think we in the classical world are so interested in tracing our genealogy, our
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
teacher back
Yeah,
to.
I know. It's interesting actually, because when I first came to America, I looked at other people's biographies, and they always listed teachers that they've had, distinguished teachers with had or had great influence on them. It's just wonderful. But if you look at English musicians' biographies, you very rarely see a teacher mentioned. That's what I think. Certainly, you certainly won't see one on my biography.
Though I should say, because we share in admiration, you much more closely than I, but Richard Hickox, whom you mentioned, who I got to know a little bit in Sydney when he was music director of Australian Opera.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
It's such a lovely, lovely, lovely man.
Wow. Wow.
And his recordings that you probably played on his B minor mass.
Yeah, I'm playing on that. Yeah.
Ian, literally the fastest tempi I've ever heard. I had to stop listening to it because I thought these are going to start to sound normal. I thought, was the most amazing, really well-rounded, quite a profound musician, but never really known specifically as a Bach person.
Right. If I could just give you a very, very quick story about my life with Bach. In fact, Bach was really the earliest or the first composer that I ever really had anything to do with. What happened was that I had piano lessons for about 6 months when I was 7 years old and gave it up. That was what happened. And there was an old out-of-tune piano. I carried on playing. There was a kid at school. We were about 12 years old. I actually had some facility by that point. I mean, awful. No idea about technique. I saw some of my old organ music actually from when I was 13. The fingering is, oh, dear me. There's sort of knitting going on. But this kid at school taught himself to play the clarinet. And he came up to me one day and he said, do you play the piano? And I didn't want to say, no, I don't, not really well. And I said, oh, yeah, of course. And he said, do you want to play some things? And so the first thing that we played was the Trio Sonata No. 1 in E flat for organ. And the clarinet played the top line, and the piano had the left hand, as it were, and pedal. And we played. And I just loved it. I loved it. It's like a hook. So in a pop song, you just can't hear it enough, or to hear it again and again and again. And we played until our fingers were sore, and he couldn't play anymore. We played this piece over, and I learned it, of course. I used to do recitals of all 6 trio sonatas later in life.
Oh my.
But but that first movement of the first trio sonata has always been one of my most. It does something in some sort of.
So you did have
up here.
It was your road to Damascus.
I suppose it was, yeah. It was, yeah.
Really, that is just terrific. Well, then you may have just answered one of my 2 final questions. I wanted to know 2 of your favorite pieces that you've performed, and 2 favorite pieces that you have that aren't for anything that you can participate in but really love.
By Bach. Oh, by Bach. Well, I love playing. You mentioned Brandenburg 5. I love playing Brandenburg 5. That's probably one of my favorite. That and the D minor harpsichord concerto. But Brandenburg 5 it develops in such a wonderful way, and none of the parts are very virtuosic at all. The violin part, there's no sort of.
Although the harpsichord part sounds hard enough to me.
No, not until later. And so, I think this is the beauty for me. This is the beauty of it, and it's sort of emblematic in a way of how the harpsichord, in its historical context, was kind of, as it were, at the back of the orchestra, and nobody really just doing its sort of rhythm and harmony thing. And then in that piece comes right to the forefront. And so that the piece starts rather simply. And there's no virtuosic stuff in the violin. There's none of that sort of Vivaldi, stuff going on. and the flute is just fluting away, and the harpsichord sort of noodling away. And then as the piece progresses, the harpsichord comes, there's a moment where it starts coming out into the sunlight, and eventually is completely showing off. And so I think that's it's just wonderfully constructed to me. It's a wonderful idea.
I'm going
And
to
it,
go listen to it with that in mind. And having seen you, by the way, I did catch, because you look like you're having a great time with that. Although I did get a glimpse of why you might have been fired from me and my gal. I mean, definitely moments where you look like you would. There's nothing on earth you would rather be doing than playing Vandenberg 5. Oh, that's really
so
cool.
that's definitely one of my favorite pieces to play.
And I've seen you conduct B minor. Is that one of your one of the pieces that you just return to every time?
Yeah. I mean, of course, sort of thing. I mean, it's just the epitome of Baroque style and affect. You know, there's nothing greater than that. And so, of course, that's a real blast, as we say in America, to do that. And getting too technical. Yeah.
And anything else, like, you know, like a cello suite that you love, but is not in your instrument.
Yeah, that's hard. There's so much, isn't there? There's so much to really sort of pinpoint. I don't know about Bach.
And you personally have experienced, because of your career, you've actually played more Bach than probably many people on just by sheer dint.
I've played a lot of Bach. Yeah,
no?
I played a lot of Vivaldi Four Seasons as well, but I've done a terrific amount of Bach. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things actually about playing continuo, which I'm, you know about, with Bach, one of the features of Baroque style, of course, is improvisation. And, in Vivaldi, for example, he would expect the violinists to embellish to a large extent. Or Corelli, he wrote out some of his violin sonatas. He wrote out suggested ornamentation, which is very, very florid. Yeah. And when I have a very strong feeling that one should not make those sort of embellishments in Bach. Yeah. And I think that's how I feel about it. And I think the reason for that is that with Bach, and I think this is one of the really strong communicative elements of his music, is the perfection of the writing. You can't alter a single note of Bach, which is not true of some other composers, that you can't add or take away. And so what are you going to embellish? What are you going to embellish that Bach hasn't already done for you? So I think that his style is his compositional level, as it were, is such that it's reached an element of perfection there, which, who are you or I to alter a single note that J.S. Bach wrote?
Which is hard. That I love that, and that makes total sense. And I don't even know if people watching this realize this, but Bach writes out ornamentation in a way that is different from any Baroque composer.
Right.
Like you say, like it just would have been understood. But with Bach, when he wants an ornament, he will write it out.
We'll write it, yeah,
and
exactly.
And obviously he, a marking, but often in a slow movement, for example, he'll just write out what he wants. But it's just a little tricky as a continual player because everything you do is improvisational. So I guess
yes, I think that's a very good point. And in fact, one thing I wanted to say was about that is that you were saying less is more and more earlier on. I've found that as the years have gone by, my concept of continuo playing has actually become minimum. I mean, for example, when as a teenager, if you're playing the St. Matthew Passion continuo part, the recitatives, you might splatter. Now I personally agonize over whether I should play 2 notes or 3, or whether they should have the 3rd at the top of the chord, or the right. And the whole thing has become distilled into the, not because I'm so great. It's just that as time goes by, one feels that, no, that's just not right. It needs to be. And so with experience, that's kind of what's happened.
Maybe this aging thing really is good for you. Hey, listen, we're gonna have to come back and do another one of these. Maybe even get you to sit at a harpsichord and an organ and talk
a
little bit about
sure.
that, because I think that for people who don't play continuo, it is such a mystery, and it's really interesting to enlighten people, and I need to learn some new tricks as well. So thank you so much, and I know we'll enjoy this and have a great time with the Boston Symphony this weekend.
Yeah, will do. Thank you so much, Chris.
We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Yeah, bye.